is really backed by these years of researched books. So, I
Yeah.
mean, really, you get like, if you really want to dig into the lore of this book you have coming out, the first two is a great launching pad to
Yeah.
really get there if you
Well,
really want to
I
dive
So,
like
and
in.
it.
it's a good launch into what we're going to talk about
Yeah.
because if you look at the mythopoetic style or the typical polytheist style down through history, through the classics, is that they mix in their belief system, as
Fantasy.
in their religion, they mix in their history, and they mix in their genealogies within those stories.
Absolutely. All of them do.
And they do it in ways through allegories, through locations, symbols, and people don't know that that's what they're reading because it's designed only for the adepts of polytheism to understand what is really being meant from that. So when you go into any of the arts, whether it's going to look at a painting, and people are saying we're trying to get the meaning and the feeling. Well, the meaning and the feeling is the pablum. The art is about what it's really translating to the adepts because they sponsor the arts. So it's about them, not about us. It's how they do things in sort of plain sight. So, like you look at like Da Vinci's Last Supper. Well, he's got those three triptych architecture with different dimensions seemingly in each of those windows in behind, let alone everything else that's going on in there. And there's no grail on the table. There's no chalice on the table at the Last Supper. And you've got John looking like more female than male.
Hmm.
And because they're saying, no, that's Mary Magdalene. And the V between them is the symbol of the Grail, of the Grail bloodline.
Saint
And
Grail.
it's just yeah, just that's how they do things. And they do it using our belief system, and in this case, Christianity, as sort of the veneer, but what's at the core you have to be able to see into. And you see into that because of the language and of the imagery, everything that's taciturn that's in there, the allegories, the names. That's what brings out the real story. And so when polytheists look at the Bible, they look at the Bible as a fairy tale. We've all heard this,
Hmm.
right? And they're not saying it the way you think it means. A fairy tale is a story where you have a happily ever after ending. And it is a very interesting sort of narrative, but that's not the meaning of the story. It's just the glitz and the sort of the vessel to carry all of this other information that's in there. So you have to understand the allegories, you have to understand the names, you have to understand the genealogies, you have to understand the symbols for the religion, to pull out the whole meaning. So what they say is if you read the Bible, that's the superficial tale, but you have to be an adept of polytheism to understand what all of those locations, names, allegories really mean. And you only learn that if you're going to become a polytheist and become an adept, because you're only going to get pablum again below adept level, whether it's 32nd degree Scottish Rite or second degree York Rite. That's not adept level. You have to be third degree York or 33rd degree to start getting into the real meanings. And so what Tolkien and Lewis did, they created something that they really like to focus on in their writings is the eucatastrophe, which is the happily ever after ending. And their definition, this is their definition and their invention, is not mine. They said that eucatastrophe is to save the reader from the horrible feelings and understanding that the hero meets a tragic end. So you rewrite that tragic end into a happily ever after ending. And because polytheists will accept Jesus as a prophet and a teacher, but not as deity status or the word of God or the Jehovah of the Elohim, then he doesn't rise after dying. That's the eucatastrophe part to give people a good feeling. And so they adopt him in as somebody like Confucius, as somebody like Mohammed, as somebody like Buddha, but not as who he says he is. That's not their belief system. So that's the style of writing that Tolkien and Lucas did. Tolkien and Lewis did. And that this is based on an older tradition. And they were part of a writing society called the Inkling Society. And the Inkling Society is like, and I'll come back to the Inklings a little bit more in a minute, is like the Knights of the Helmet Society and the Spear Shaker Society that Francis Bacon organized to develop the English language and had writers like Shakespeare. Um, and if you think Spear Shaker and Shakespeare are somehow related, probably. And if you wonder where that allegory comes from two Greek gods, Apollo and Athena, who held the spear as a weapon of the gods, and when they shook it, it could do magical, powerful things. But they're also supporter of the arts. So he's writing and these writers are writing to develop the English language. And of course, Shakespeare is very much like mythopoetic. It's like the same classics that come out of Rome, like with Ovidius or Hesiod or Homer. It's the same sort of style that they've passed down. So this Inkling Society, and by the way, Francis Bacon was a Rosicrucian,
Hmm.
which is kind of key. And so the Inkling Society is a society, a writing society at Oxford. And this is in the 20s and the 30s when Tolkien and Lewis are there. And at that time, I mean, it's not that long ago, but it is almost a
Century.
different era that poor and the middle class, as we understood them, they would never be allowed into Oxford.
Mm, no.
So what are they doing there? Right? And now they're joining a Rosicrucian society, the Inkling Society. Well, Rosicrucians are higher than a Freemasonic adept and higher than an Illuminati adept. So this is getting, halfway up that thelemic tree of the secret society orders. And that A, you wouldn't have the money. B, they would never accept you at Oxford. C, they weren't there to learn about these types of topics. They were there to only learn the craft because both have bloodlines that go back to royales.
Really?
I did not know that.
Yes. And Lewis, like I believe he's actually his grandfather is, if I've got it, the spacing right, his grandfather or great grandfather, but I believe it's the grandfather, was the illegitimate son of the King of England.
Hmm.
Yes, they moved to Ireland. He moves back. And Lewis goes back to the bloodlines of the old kings of Llewellyn in
Which makes
Wales.
sense when you look at the mythos figure he ties in as Aslan, going back to what you're talking about, like even in the embodiment of like the emblem of English power into
Yeah,
his narrative.
yeah, the lion, yeah. And Aslan was an Avatara
Yeah,
figure in Vedic and a lion figure.
yeah.
And the Avatar was there's two different versions. It may have been both, or two different stories have come into one. But Vishnu and Shiva will come up for the more you dig into it as the Avatar for both of them. And Vishnu is the same one who was the Avatar for um, Buddha to give him the knowledge to start Buddhism. And what's interesting is Aslan is an incarnation. That's an incarnation. What Jesus does is not an incarnation.
Well, even what
He's,
the most famous line in the books, because as a kid I read all of them, and I mean it's acceptable and as a child in Christianity to read those, even though they're mythical, um, in comparison to Harry Potter, which wasn't allowed. But the one of the most famous lines in all of the books is during the last battle when he's talking to them and he says, "You must go to another world and tell them about me, for in that world I have another name." And they use it in the
yeah,
movies and they do it in the Prince Caspian one.
yeah,
He says, in that world I have another name. And so I've never looked at that line as a insertion of incarnation like that.
yeah. And an incarnation is what happens with Antichrist in the end time,
Right.
right? So this Christ consciousness is being portrayed in this because this is how Christ consciousness would appear in another civilization on another planet. That's how that Aslan is depicted because he's in another dimension actually as you go through the closet,
Well,
right?
yeah, and the how that
Yeah.
world's created in the first book, the entire first, because he goes back and he wrote The Magician's Nephew,
Magician's Nephew.
and The
Mhm.
Magician's Nephew is all about
Yeah. So,
dimensions.
yeah. And how many books in his sequel?
Say again, sir.
How many books in his cycle of stories in about Narnia?
There's 7 Narnia
Yeah.
books.
Yeah, all done after the image and the age and the context of the seven wandering stars,
Mm.
Yes.
right?
Well, and with that yeah.
When people, and I'm way behind on emails, if they do get the documents from me, I have that even at the end of it with how he based his 7 books in terms of, and give you some reference points. So, but this incarnation is not a Christian understanding. The Word was made flesh. The Holy Spirit made the soul and the body within Mary so that the Word who already was would go into it. He's not sharing a body with somebody. And this body was going to be used for something special. So, but from a polytheist version, they would counterfeit that because they counterfeit everything. So that becomes their incarnation. So in the end time, the Christ consciousness is an incarnation.
I'm assuming you've read Lewis's works in a depth or to a depth. In the books, when he is resurrected on top of the occult stone, essentially, right? Um, in that stone in the books, they even mention it has like the writings of the world from when it was founded. In Freemasonry, last time we spoke, you mentioned how there is a place for magic to be done. Is there a correlation between those two things and the narrative of like Aslan's resurrection uh, in that
Not
book?
sure I understood the question. And
So in Lewis's work, he talks about Aslan, and when he kills him, he
yeah,
dies the first
yeah,
time, and he's
yeah,
resurrected. He's
yeah,
resurrected on a like an altar, on a
yeah,
stone altar.
yeah,
When we spoke last, you had mentioned Freemasonry
yeah,
often has a ritualistic altar near
yeah.
its locations. Is there a correlation between that portion of the book and the Masonic ritualism? That's, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I think so because in that in polytheist, it's not a resurrection, it's a reincarnation. And it's not that he actually died, went to sleep. It's that their spirit is released as a disembodied spirit. So it happens bang, bang, right? And now you're into an altar in another location, in another dimension, as the allegory would be understood. And that would be in a place like Sheol or Hades, right? Um, and they would have you imagine that there are up to 7 different dimensions in polytheism. So each of these 7 planets are in 7 different dimensions.
And yes, you see that in his writings. He mentions all that.
Yes, he does.
Are you? He has a
And
series of
that's polytheist doctrine.
books called the Planetary series. And in it, it goes into detail about, and I was never aware of these books until the last couple years, but it goes into what you're talking about, the doctrine of like dimensions and how they believe in the ascension.
Yeah.
And I don't think that most Christians are aware of that portion of his writings. Um, they're called like planetaria and things like that. And so you mentioned he has a bloodline that he goes back to. Specifically, what bloodline would that be if it is the bloodlines of the kings? Uh,
Llewellyn.
okay. And is his writings that's influential
There
of his
and by the way,
bloodline?
and they were the original kings of Wales. So in the document, if what I have laid out is how you trace Lewis back and its transliteration and back to the kings. I've just followed all through, just as I'll take Tolkien back to the bloodline of Odin.
And you see, that's what I was about to ask next, was like you have to be kind of dense to look at any portion of J.R.R. Tolkien's works and not see the ruinistic pagan magic in his
Yeah.
working.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, people will say, okay, I'm more easily able to toss Tolkien over the side, but not Lewis. That's where I draw the line. And they'll say things like what you're saying. It's all these obviously different creatures, but if you looked at the characters in the
Well,
Narnia
Mr.
series,
Mr. Tumnus. Mr.
yeah,
Tumnus is Pan.
is a satyr. Yeah, he's a satyr, satyr. Bacchus is as well. He's got two satyrs
Yeah,
in there. You've got bloodlines that just go right back into history of the matriarchal bloodline. That's really when you look at the allegories, going back to Lilith. In fact, it says that, as I
it does.
recall.
It does.
Yeah, and the names like that are used are all
Pagan,
name.
Janice the witch.
Yeah, and on and on and on. It's just I mean, they with Bacchus. I mean, they pull that right out of a satyr god's name, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable how far they get. And you start looking in at all of these different kinds of characters. This is polytheist history with a polytheist genealogy, with a
Mhm.
polytheist religion. As you start to connect these things, because why would you put those bloodlines in if it wasn't important?
Well, and like from again, sir, not I've listened to you for over a decade now, and you've talked extensively, and you look and then you go back with the same perspective, and you look with that fresh set of eyes onto these works. You have to almost sin willfully to ignore that these things aren't talking about godly things.
Yeah. And I'm not saying he's not a great writer because he is, obviously. His
Yeah,
skill is unbelievable. And I'm not saying that the stories aren't entertaining.
Well,
They are.
Harry Potter's entertaining, and
Yeah.
she's a phenomenal writer as well.
but you
Yeah.
go back. You said the organization that they were both a part of, the in at Oxford, right?
Yeah.
It was founded by Francis Bacon, and
No,
or
no.
what?
Francis Bacon had his own writing societies back in the time of Elizabeth and King
Okay,
James, right? But this is the Rosicrucian Golden Dawn organization, the one that Aleister Crowley founded.
Hmm.
correct. Okay, so um, you mentioned the traditional shaking and the
Yeah,
spear with the two deities in Greek mythology. You can
yeah,
see how like there's an influence behind it with that, right? In
yeah,
their writing, you said they were popular because, and that has to play a role. Like the spirits of this world propagating their doctrine,
yeah, yeah.
their religion. And so what better way to package it than under the guise of,
It's just
And
like Peter
and the
Pan.
children to boot.
Yeah.
well, that makes it much more aggravating.
It's a lot like
Yes.
Peter Pan. They made it all cartoony and fun, and
Yeah,
but the real story of Peter Pan's pretty dark.
Vicious, yeah.
yeah. And going through another portal
Mhm.
Yeah.
into a place where nobody ever dies of immortality. Pan,
Sacri
he's shown as a little fairy, but Pan, we all know who Pan is. It's a satyr goat god,
and he
right?
sacrifices children in it
Yeah.
when the
Just, yeah. It's just crazy how we have been prepared to accept these things. And people say they want to believe that, Christians can have good writers. Well, the reason why we don't have that many popular writers is that the publishing industry generally is dominated by polytheists, right? It's just like Hollywood. Why aren't there a lot of Christian movies? Because Hollywood's not Christian. It's really hard to get that stuff out and penetrate the hegemony because they control all of this. But just because somebody says he's a Christian, we should judge him or evaluate him. Judge is probably a poor word there. I'll switch that to evaluate him on the fruits. And how does that bring anybody to Christianity? It doesn't. How does that entertain people? It does. How does that brainwash people in preparation for polytheism? It does.
So how do you bring in something for those people who are probably still out there talking, well, okay, well, that's just a portion of Lewis's works. What
Mhm.
about the things that are used in common defense of up in an apologetic sense that stray from his fantasy works? And I can see it, me and Justin were speaking of this regarding specifically the screw tape letters, how it is truth out open when you really look at it from the perspective you're speaking from. So how
So
do you reconcile like mere Christianity and the screw tape letters in his and
tends,
how
I
he
mean, when you get into the fine sort of doctrine of how Gnostic Christianity works, you really have to understand the words that they're writing, that they're double entendres. It's kind of like what was listening to Pope Francis, where he would
get
say things that you could take two ways. So they'll draft in things that sound Christian but have a polytheist meaning to it. I would say, and a lot of people have said, but he repented and became Christian at some point and renounced all of that. And I'm going, there's nothing on record that he ever renounced what he wrote,
mm-mm.
ever.
That is curious.
Well, no, there's many people, yeah, that have renounced what they've wrote in life, and he's not one.
Yeah. So
And what better, deception
why
than to,
wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
right? What better deception though to name something mere Christianity, and then
Yeah.
when you look at it from because there's portions of Gnosticism that if you don't look at it with discernment, it
Yeah.
sounds correct. It sounds appealing.
So
It's very seducing.
what
And
do you
that's
think
that's the style.
the goal is? Why were they planted in those in Oxford, or how did this come about?
Because you did mention that they would have not been, presumably of class or standard to.
Well, they had to be in Oxford. And you don't have any records of Lewis and Tolkien as being Freemasonry. And yet they're in the Rosicrucian Society. That that can't happen. And Rosicrucian is higher than Freemasonry. But if you are a pureblood, you are initiated from childhood. You're not
Mm.
allowed to take an adept title till you're 25 to 30 years old. But you are higher than a Freemason adept. You are higher than Illuminati. You are higher than the Rosicrucian. You are
Shortcut.
pureblood, and you just don't have the title yet. And again, that's not unusual. And you look at religions as that adulthood, and even in the Bible, is 20 to 40 years old, right? And there's a process, right? So that's the same thing. It's just counterfeiting of the monotheism than polytheism. So you can look at the priesthoods and say, well, there seems to be a lot of similarities. Yeah, but it's who they're worshiping. And one's counterfeiting the other. And what it comes down to is which one do you believe is being counterfeited? And which one is trying to always create the same agenda that happened before the flood and the same end goal. It's all about that because the history that they're bringing to you is telling you this is going to happen again,
Mm-hmm.
but not in the way the Bible tells you.
So, for example, with Tolkien, Tolkien was in the First World War, and
Yeah.
so uh, and he dealt with all kinds of stuff. Is there any history that you're aware of anything he did in Europe that associated with any Freemasonry or anything of that nature? I mean, I know that he was a soldier on the front lines and everything in the trenches, but um, even the movie they made a few years ago about Tolkien and the
Yeah.
origin of the Lord of the Rings and all of that,
Yeah.
they didn't touch on his childhood. They didn't
Yeah.
really do anything there. And um,
You can trace his genealogy, and I do it in the document, but most people say you really can't. They do migrate to England, but the Tolk family came down into Normandy in the time of Rollo, who changed their names to the St. Clairs with the Treaty of St. Clair when they expropriated Normandy from France. This is the same bloodlines that then moved over to Scotland as the De Bruces and the Sinclairs, as we understand it, who developed Freemasonry, and William the Conqueror, right, in 1066. And he's part of that Royale class that comes there. And there's also a branch that moves over into Germany that's more closely associated with Tolkien. But he's elite and nobility all the way through, and so is his family. And how he gets into Oxford at that time is that's the only way you're going to be there, because they wouldn't have had the money if you buy into who they say he is in terms of this poor average person, right?
Well, so
And where
both
do,
of them, both
and
of
so
them
they're
were
so
related
they
to
weren't
kings. Sorry.
yeah, so they weren't in the Inkling Society to learn about the history. They already knew it. They're there to have their literary crafts developed so that they could become a good novelist.
So this was kind of what they were born for, that this was their
Yeah,
purpose, their destiny.
yeah, that's what their role to be. I mean, look at what Shakespeare wrote, whether it's him or it's Bacon, doesn't really matter. If you go with the standard genealogy of who Shakespeare is, he's the son of a butcher with no Oxford education, but he's talking Oxford language of that time, and he has this vast knowledge of occult history and ancient history that he ought not to know.
Right, as a layman.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because you said that they were both mentioned or both related to kings and they were both there at the same time. And so
Yes.
like it's the just another example of the spirits of this world that seek to keep their lines close and together and eyes on them because it is coincidental that two of the most prolific authors of the last century were there at the same time and have kind of dubious origins in regards to their blood. Like I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in divine storytelling. And
Especially
so
not with these kind of people. There's no
no.
coincidences.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the last point in time where there was this complete utter dominance of writing. It starts to expand as more people become educated. They're still controlling it through the brainwashing at the universities, who controls the publishing, but it's not from this very small class of people, right? It's a larger, broader class. Um, but I mean, they are raised up to saint-like status.
Oh yeah.
And I just don't know why we can't recognize that, yes, they can be very good writers. Maybe they're Christians or not, but they never renounced their writings, and they were writing about polytheism.
It's almost like they're writing their version of history or like their Bible.
Well, in a
It's
lot of
their
ways it is, isn't it?
it's their cultural biases that goes in it. So in where you see the overlaps of fairies and types of beings, you have a Celtic, Irish, Welsh, Scottish sort of overlay. But when Tolkien does his, it's Norse.
Right.
Hmm.
And
Why? Because that's where his bloodline goes back to.
And it makes sense because when you look at different types of, even in a real world setting, you look at the people you know who are attracted to those writings. Like I
Yeah.
make knowing what my blood is and everything. Like I've always been attracted to like Tolkien and stuff like that. Whereas I know plenty of people who are our friend Miss Linda is very British, much always has loved.
And you look at all the different book series that Tolkien and Lewis from there. I mean, you could say Harry Potter was inspired from them.
Everything,
Yeah.
Terry
right?
Brooks with the Shannara Chronicles books.
Game of Thrones.
I mean, the
It
list
it
it's
it really
endless.
took it mainstream along with other pushes like Walt Disney,
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
who are
because
rising about the same time and are
well,
now
and
doing the same history for the same target markets, only on film, right? it's unbelievable how all of these things start working together. And Walt Disney, I mean, everybody says, well, of course he's Freemason. No, he wasn't. He's Rosicrucian. That's the entertainment part that the Rosicrucians handle in terms of part of their agenda.
And you see you know, the consolidation of media, right, by Disney even.
Yeah.
And you see the other controlling media empires are all origins of similar nature and such, but
Well, CBS is their logos like
is
an
the eye,
eyeball.
right? And
Yeah.
NBC's the peacock. But you look at Disney specifically, like you just said, Mr. Wayne, and you see that, Fantasia was one of their very first like
Yeah.
real big ones.
Hercules.
And what is Fantasia? It is all witchcraft. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the one scene is about selling your soul for power.
Cinderella.
They all
Their
are.
cat's name is Lucifer.
Yeah.
And
It's
Cinderella.
just, once you start to dig into these things, there, you just can't sort of say it's all coincidence. And also at the time of the Rising, you have, in the 30s, you start to get, and probably in the 20s, but again, we're in the same sort of time zone. You get the starting of the horror classics,
Mm,
both in film and more in writings and being developed. It's another avenue of the same polytheist religion, and then you have the rise of the alien phenomena.
Right. L. Ron
Paul,
Hubbard and those dudes.
yeah, yeah. This again,
And you,
it's different organizations all linked in going in the same direction that are launching, saying this is the time of preparedness that we need to have put in place. And because they're all Gnostics, they're thinking in the same line of Alice Bailey, where they had 2025 lined up.
mm.
well, and even in the century before the last, you had things like Grimm's fairy tales that
Yeah,
told a bunch of origin stories
yeah.
and mythos.
Boy, those are dark.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a copy. They are extreme, some of them, but the resurrection, the good guy always winning, that's not as
Yeah.
prevalent there, and that's very truth. You've seen a softening or a palatability almost of this occultism wide open, and you can't turn on any programming now without it being fully entrenched into the market, even in literature, like you're saying. The
Even now, it's almost like, is he a bad guy, or maybe he's misunderstood, or, the bad guys aren't as bad guys as they used to
Well,
be.
and you see that, when the scriptures say that, the enemy appears as an angel of light, that you see in this entertainment, you see in this, and that's what you're saying. He's not the bad guy. And
They've
so,
gotten away from like Joseph Campbell's, oh, what is that called? The Warrior's Journey or whatever.
Yeah.
but you see, like, with going back to a literary character between Tolkien and Lewis, somebody like Gandalf and
Yeah.
Tolkien's works, that totally skews the perspective of Christianity and the resurrection of the spirit to more of, like you were saying, reincarnation.
Yeah, because he comes back as Gandalf the White.
Right, and you see it over and
Yeah.
over again in the scripture, or in their storytelling, their counterfeit of the scriptures when you
Yeah.
really pay
Yeah.
attention.
And
Uh,
and the other thing is where's the Christian side in these stories? Where's God?
right.
Where's the parable? If you're going to do it as, okay, this is a fictional parable, where's the moral of the story from a Christian perspective? Where
When
is
I've
it? It's all missing, and that's why it was important for Lewis to put a Christ-like figure in there, but masterfully in the Gnostic understanding.
I've heard it say that they've tried. I've heard some circles argue that Aragon in Tolkien's work is supposed to be representative of Christ's.
I've heard that the elves were supposed to be angels in Lord of the
Correct.
Rings as well.
Well, and
But I mean, even in that in itself, comparing angels and elves seems like a problem.
but the Samarillion is the
Yeah,
one where I think he really like details his truths in what he really is. Because going back after reading your works and things and looking with that perspective in those eyes, the Samarillion is Satan talking when you really look, and it is the Gnosticism of really not much different than
Yeah.
Mormonism in that novel, and it's
Yeah.
presented as like the codex for the entire realm that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
And so in literary works like that, Tolkien and Lewis they came before L. Ron Hubbard, correct?
Hmm. Yes.
Okay. So like you said, you get the fantastical magic with Tolkien and Lewis, and then you start to delve into the spiritual, like the conjuring of the truth of those things in what we call modern sci-fi and stuff. And really, as somebody who used to read a lot, it's hard to read a book when you know all these things for fun. Um, all these books that are in this genre of sci-fi, whether it's Robert Jordan and his Time Wheel saga or George R. R. Martin, they're all the same story.
Yep, orcs, uh, dwarfs,
They're all the same
whatever.
story,
Yeah,
and
they
they're
are.
telling the same story. And
And,
even in the Robert Jordan series, there's seven wheels in that time
Yeah.
series. I never caught
oh,
that.
and then there's the new movie coming out, the Odyssey. They're making the Odyssey movie.
Well, and so they keep telling this narrative to us. Excuse me. Um, in a preparation, that's what you're saying, right? They're clearing
Framing
the
it.
pathway and priming us like a motor, so that when the flip is switched
Yeah.
on, it or the switch is flipped on, we accept it.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think
Well, well,
like
let me just sort
yeah,
of
go
bring
ahead, sir.
this
Yes, sir.
into perspective. And it's also why in one form of eschatology it has to be rewritten and re-understood, is that there is a great falling away of the church,
Right.
right? There is going to be a significant amount of Christianity and organized Christianity that's going to go with the Babylon polytheist religion. And it's only going to be the true Christians, the ones that are probably, for lack of, because we're not quite there yet, the conservative sort of view versus the liberal view. And even within the Catholic Church, you see that split, and there's going to be that split there as well, are going to say, no, that's not what our history is. That's not who Jesus is. That's not who God is. But they prepared us to accept what they're going to sell us when the false prophets come along. So you have to get to that point where they start to reveal things and catastrophes start to happen, and they take credit for these catastrophes to convert or be destroyed from the face of the earth, that they're playing on the seed that's not well grounded. That will be the ones who fall away, as Jesus told us about.
How I growing up, you in the church, Justin and I have always heard of, the great falling away, and we come in different eschatological backgrounds,
Yep.
but very similar, I would say. Uh, do you have a set time frame? Do you think that that's a long drawn thing? Do you think that like it began in the last century with Lewis, not Lewis specifically, but stuff like that and the introduction over time? Because this is something that I don't, I've never felt as a rapid thing, but I'd be very interested to understand in your relationship to all this how you would think it goes together.
Well, I would say that the polytheist forces have, invaded Christianity a long time ago
Oh yeah.
and have controlled it to various degrees throughout its history and have been ready for the end time and the falling away, even though they have to wait for the ordained time. They're always trying to prepare for having things happen before the ordained time. So yes, it's been there, and they have to, every generation, they have to double down and continue to prepare and adapt with the times. So when we look at how the Roman Church has been in position for a very long time to be part of this universal religion. I'm not saying it's going to be, but certainly will be part of. But so will a lot of Christianity as we look at the eschatology that sort of goes with it. It's not exclusive to the Roman Church. And that we've seen all of the Gnostic influences in Protestantism within the churches, within the teachings, within the symbols. So they've been preparing us for a long period of time. It's just now hitting a higher level of sort of a fever pitch, if I can sort of put it that way, and that they're becoming even more bold and in your face as we go, which means their confidence is getting higher that the time is coming and they want to make sure that they're going to bring on as many as they can with them because they look at Christianity as the large force, that and Islam, but for a different reason, and how they're going to, and their ways of dealing with those two groups are different. But at the end of the day, they need to convert people to monotheism, get it down to, I mean, over to polytheism, not monotheism, get them to convert to polytheism over time. And then one last sort of small step for humankind, so to speak. And um, to be able to get that number down who stay loyal to as small as possible so that they can handle that type of populist rebellion.
So, why do you think that your take on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien seems to ruffle so many feathers? Because I mean, I kind
Yeah.
of I didn't know any better either until I heard you say it, and then I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah, that's fine. As long as it's the truth, I'm happy with it.
It's
They sold Tolkien and Lewis very, very well as Christians and superhero Christians.
Hmm.
So people bought into their religion and they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to say I'm appreciating polytheism.
Hmm.
So it's really difficult because you grow up on it.
Right.
And your parents told you this. The church told you this.
right.
It's absolutely ingrained. And it's like when somebody isn't prepared to look at prophecy with clear cut scripture, they'll believe if they're not prepared to dig into the detail and do all of the topology and line everything up, they're prepared to believe something is different than what's written there because they've bought into that and they don't want to upset their whole life of belief system and say, how could I be so wrong? And we got all of the world that's teaching this type of eschatology and don't want to admit it's the wisdom of the world. When you start rewriting what Jesus said, take a step back.
It kind of reminds me, and this will probably ruffle more feathers, but we don't celebrate Christmas, Easter, any of the pagan holidays.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing. When you tell somebody, "Hey, Christmas is pagan," they get
Yeah,
really upset.
they do.
Well,
Or
and
Easter.
Yes, oh, very upset. It's like you're
Yeah.
you're poking the wrong thing, man.
Easter
Yeah.
is always the one that
Yeah.
yeah.
And or ask what does Samhain or Halloween have to do with
Hmm.
Christianity?
Well, and we try to be, we don't,
It's a whole most holy day of polytheism, but
and we don't observe, we're not legalists in how we observe the high Sabbaths or whatnot, but
yeah,
we do keep the Sabbaths, and uh, it if you keep the Sabbaths, you can see how blasphemous the world's religious system and holidays are because they're
yeah.
all black masses, so to speak, in regards to
I'm just going
our
to lean
faith.
over and get something here.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I started when I went down that road. I wanted my faith to be authentic,
Okay.
and to be authentic, you got to get those things
I
out.
love teaching aids, Mr. Wayne.
Yeah. Well, this is, if I can get it on camera there. Okay. I don't want to get it closer. That's the wheel of polytheism in
Right.
terms of their 8 holy Sabbaths.
Mm.
Okay. And their holy Sabbaths work on the equinoxes and um, the solstices. So December 21, June 21, March 21, September 21. And so when you start seeing what's going on in Lewis in the winter, that's beginning the solstice um, holiday. And it is, it's called Yule. What do we celebrate at Christmas? Yule, Yule tidings. The hunt of Odin, the 12 days of Christmas, right? And it overlaps into December 21 and then December 25, which is Mithra's birth date. That again, it's just absolutely crazy. And then in the 6 week points, you're going to have like between Halloween or between September 21 and December 21 is 6 weeks, which is Halloween. That happens for 11 days. So you have like Valentine's Day, which is Lupercalis, the satyr
Hmm.
festival for Valentine's, right? You have May Day. I mean, all of these are days that we do separate celebrations around. And with several of them, like with Easter and with Christmas, is right in with those festivals. And then they overload it with polytheism and can worship in plain sight and then get us to do their rituals in plain sight. It's the same thing. And so writings of these books will be centered around these holidays and these dates.
Well, and it's a spiritual feeding, right? Like by getting the unwilling to, or not unwilling, the unknowing to participate unwillingly, unknowingly, they get a spiritual power source from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and you see it like I don't know about you, but this past winter season during their Feast of Yule felt very different than it has in years past. It felt very much darker, grayer than it has in years before. And it's, I don't know if it was the overload of the turmoil of the things they're, working in the world in their other ways, but you could see that it was distracted. It was different. Um, and so when they throw all this in our faces, like they have a new documentary movie or not movie coming out, not documentary, a new movie coming out called Disclosure by Steven
It's out.
Spielberg. It
The
already came out.
disclosure documentary thing.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so, and it's kind of the building off of this because the one thing that I disagree strongly with Tim Alberino about is uh, planets and dimensions. I look at it I don't like those words, but uh, these things are going on in this realm, in the realm of the unseen, not off site, right? I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I believe in interdimensionals.
Yeah.
That's actually a great
Well,
question, Gary.
but it's kind of
What
a,
do you think of that?
yeah, it's kind of a combination of both. So, I mean, within the firmament, we have the seven wandering stars, right?
Right.
So we know there's planets, and then we know outside is the universe. So the question is do these beings come intergalactical or interdimensional? But everything that's in the occult would say interdimensional.
Right.
But that doesn't dismiss that there aren't some planets and they're
Right.
celebrated, right? Yeah.
I didn't
No,
mean that. Right.
I know
Okay.
you didn't. I just so when people are listening that they have a frame of reference there. So is there a possibility that there are planets and galaxy? Absolutely. I mean, God can have it's this. We have no idea how big the universe is, but in the area that we're playing with is more interdimensional, and we're told about different dimensions in the Bible. We know there's a dimension for heaven. We know there's a physical world. We know there's a place called Sheol or Hades that's likely in another dimension in the earth, right? And so we also know there's an earth. Then things are going on in the earth as well, depending on whichever belief system you come on that. There's a physical aspect, and then there's this interdimensional aspect where the gods of polytheism go to, where the demonic spirits are trying to get through. So we want to be in a position where we're not being deceived by different sort of poles apart philosophies that are designed to cattle herd us. What we can deal with is what the Bible tells us and what we can sort of physically discern and understand ourselves. So if there's anything beyond that, fine. If there isn't, fine. But we know this part to be true.
Amen.
Beyond that, we don't get biblically, and if it's not biblical that we're getting a reference to, it's probably a deception. and that everything that's mentioned biblically, it will not be a total dismissing of, it'll be a counterfeit or reimagining of what it is or what it means. And that's the same tactic that's used for scripture, a reimagining of what it means.
When
It's it's the same language if you understand it.
And you see it even going back to what we've been talking about Tolkien's work with the realm of men and all of
Yeah.
the Eastlands where the elves and the old men went and where they left and they ascended to
Yeah,
and
and they have names that link back to gods as their
right,
original
yeah,
creators that end in EL. There's a lot of EL names that are in
yeah,
there. And, at the end of the trilogy, you have all of these different creatures that are created in polytheism around the world. They're all on this ark sailing away. Why now? Because it's the age of man. That's the flood.
right,
They're no longer going to be visible and allowed to be visible, even though they may interact through the dimensions. So again, you're getting the polytheist history, their lens of what happened told in an interesting sort of way. And you just have to sort of understand, what is that imagery telling us? When you have the white elves there, what color are their hair and what color are their eyes? You have blonde hair, you have red
mm,
hair, you have blue eyes, you have hazel eyes and very pale skin, and they're quite a bit taller than all of the little ones.
hmm,
These are the Shea people, Sidhe, or Seed, or Side, or it's pronounced 100 different ways. These are the Tuatha De Danann giants, the fair
right,
folk, the fairy folk. These in the elemental hierarchy, white elves are not there. You have light elves, but not white elves. And you have dark elves. These are variations within the ugly groupings of hobbits and dwarves and gnomes and those ones. But this is a separate being, and they're treated as a separate type of nobility that you just aren't really understanding why. They move with grace. They're very, very educated. They're very, very elite. They're telling us in everything that this is a superior being, even to the humans.
yeah, because they save them
Well,
too.
don't all the humans leave and the hobbits stay or something
No,
too?
no, the humans stay and the
Humans stay and the
hobbits
hobbits leave.
and the elves leave.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, yeah, um, well, that's incredible though when you take the step back and we remove our biases because that's what life promotes and that's what the devil works upon, right? Is the enemy seeks to capture and to divide through biases and through personal opinion, but the one thing that's very admirable about you, Gary, is that you present the truth as fact and you don't put your own spin on it. And so when the words say what the words say, I mean, even the ring in Tolkien's works, right?
yeah,
Um, in elementary magic and stuff, ruins are important, and so the entire book deals with magical ruins essentially as
yeah.
well too. And it's so
Lord of the
social.
Rings.
Right.
Yeah,
It's so socially acceptable, the ring and the ruins and the open face
yeah,
Nordic worship.
yeah.
That makes me wonder, what does the ring represent that Frodo carries and he puts on, and what's the deal with that?
Well, where the kings were given their authority by the Council of the Gods is this circular assembly. This is the Ring of Kings. It's like the Knights of the Round Table. Those are all kings, right? And a ring is a representation of that, but it comes with magic and power. And
And you
again, depend.
go ahead, sir.
And
Sorry.
so when we see that ring entered into some apocrypha, like with King Solomon, that's them overlaying polytheism onto that story. It's a sure sign to the polytheists, and monotheists say, "Oh, somehow Solomon could control the demons with his rings. He would just control it through the Holy Spirit. There, he doesn't need a ring to control the demons." It's
Well,
just
and even if you
we
look at
just have to look at the imagery of what they're overlaying. So and so yeah, I mean, this ring is something that we should expect to come back again in the end time. Because even to this, even into modern times, the modern king wears a ring of kingship as a sign that he's the king. It probably marks the new golden age with these 10 kings. And they're going to bring back to life all of this imagery of Atlantis and the antediluvian times, and they're going to have a new ring of power.
When if you look at the characters that are given their rings, all each one of them have a different realm of power in it. And
Yeah,
then the dark ring that binds them all to rule them. And it's from a place of darkness, right?
yeah.
And
And
going back,
because what happens with that is understanding that these kings are given their divine right to rule by the specific God who rules over that country and kingdom.
okay, and that's a great point because the God that you're dealing with in Tolkien's work, little g, and in Lewis's work, they're two different deities that their homage is going towards, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, um, do you think that that's intentional for mass appeal? And follow up on that same question is, do you think that it's intentional for mm, like to call people in a modern sense, like to that specific cult or that specific esoteric theology that those books and authors have put forth? Like Tolkien's work deals more with the Nordic side of things, like you said. So is there a correlation between that purpose in their writing?
Yeah, there is because you're trying to reach a global audience. So you're going to get Eastern religions in some of them, Chinese religions in some of them. And they're trying to sort of make common ground and bring all of these religions, as they're disparate now, back to the original religion, that they're just a branch, a vernacular local version with the same gods with just different names of the same belief system. So that's why they're playing it out with so many different cultures and religions. You know, even the 7 days of the week, you're mixing three pantheon of gods there. They're the same gods in each of the same in the same pantheon. So
Right,
um, you've got Greek, you've got Latin, and you've got Norse in the
right.
7 days of the week.
You mentioned the some authors have Eastern writing. So another author, and he happened to die on the same day as Lewis,
Yep.
Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley's works have a very Easter touch to them. So when you read books like Brave New World or Spyglasses of Gaza, things like that, they deal with a lot of like Eastern mysticism.
Yeah.
And so this is a nice segue into my other topic I'd like to talk about. Um, some of the Eastern gods and such as well,
Yep.
or little g bloodlines.
Yep.
And some authors, maybe aside from Huxley or someone who have really proliferated those cultures, uh, bloodlines and pantheons.
Yeah. What's the question there?
Oh, so what are some authors or what are some um,
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, anytime that you're seeing um, anything to do with Buddhism or Buddhist-like organizations, understand that that is sort of reaching into that. So Star Wars, as not a author, but they're reaching into that Eastern mysticism with their Jedi bloodline, right? Because and the Brahmins have a bloodline. Like the original priests were all bloodline, just as you have a bloodline priesthood in ancient Israel. Again, counterfeit, but the Brahmin bloodline goes back to Nephilim bloodlines, back to, you know, to the gods that had produced them. So that's really how you're going to sort of delineate who those writers are. But you see a kind of a mix of Eastern mysticism